You're listening to Let's Talk Creation with Todd Wood and Paul Garner, the creation show where we learn, grow, and worship.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Let's Talk Creation with Todd and Paul. I'm Todd Wood.
And I'm Paul Garner.
And he's right here.
I'm right here.
Yeah. We have got another cycle of episodes recorded live in person.
Yeah.
We're going to try to do, let's see, 2, 4, 5, maybe
Lots.
6 or 7.
Yeah.
Oh no, 8. 7 or 8. 7 or 8, a lot of episodes.
Lots of episodes.
Lots of episodes live in person on this trip. This has been a busy one.
Yeah.
It seems busier than last time, even though...
Yeah, I think we're fitting more in. And we're here in the new offices of Core Academy.
Right, the new offices of Core Academy.
The fabulous new offices. Yeah.
Handsomely decorated, as you can see.
Yes. Perhaps the least said about that, the better.
Maybe we'll take that down when we're done. All right. So today's topic, before we get into today's topic, though, I would like you to pause right now, hit that like button, subscribe, whatever platform you're on. Yeah. Definitely leave us a review if you're able. All of that stuff helps us to know that you're out there and listening. Even if you press the dislike button, I can live with that. I'm a big enough man to admit that I get disliked by people. So, just interact with us in any way you can. We really appreciate that. That helps us out tremendously. Visit letstalkcreation.org to find out how you can financially support us as well. Obviously, flying Paul over here and keeping him for a week is some amount of expense there.
Yeah. We're doing it on a shoestring, aren't we?
We are. Yes. Quite literally, yeah. You don't even know how cheap this trip was, but anyway.
I'm on bread and water. It's all I'm getting while I'm here.
And you're lucky to be getting that, really. All right. Well,
this is not the news, despite the fact we're sat behind this desk with our
despite the fact that we've got our papers here. This is not the evening news. We're not news anchors. We have a crazy idea for this episode. We're going to do another viewer question episode. And we've called this one Jumbo Q&A. And we're going to try to just basically go through as many of these questions. We've got pages of these things. Look at all the stuff you've been asking that we have been building up. Paul's got equal amount on his. We've got other pages here with other stuff on it. We're going to try to get through as many as we possibly can. So these are going to be short answers to probably detailed questions that should end up in their own.
Yeah, some of them will. In fact, some of the things that people have sent in are ideas for future episodes. And we're very grateful for that.
Thank you.
We've got lots of good ideas. Mm-hmm. And loads of you, for example, have asked about, this is to do with our biblical chronology series, you've asked about the lifespans of the patriarchs and whether they are to be taken literally or symbolically. Do they have some kind of symbolic value? Yeah. So loads of people ask that question, and it's one we're going to come and do an episode about, surely, as part of our biblical chronology.
Surely. I mean, we've been diving into some really weird, obscure textual stuff.
Yeah.
Looking at weird fragments of texts and all that stuff. But yeah, we do want to come back to the more interesting questions about can you add them up, and should you add them up, or are they symbols? So those are very good questions. We're not going to answer those today.
Yeah.
Just know that that's an episode coming in the series. But do keep your ideas coming.
Yeah, because we've had some great ideas.
Yeah, great ideas. Yeah.
So who's going to begin?
Why don't you start? We're going to each read our own questions, and then we're going to shoot off an answer.
Yeah.
And we're going to, as I said, try to keep it succinct so we can get a bunch of...
Yeah, we'll try and do it. We're not very good at being succinct.
I don't know.
We're going to try and do that.
We'll try.
Yeah. My wife will be saying, keep it short. So I had loads of questions. I suppose I've got a lot of the geology stuff. And there were loads of questions about the post-flood boundary, because you'll remember we did that series, where we had some guests on. We had, who do we have? Tim Clary.
Yep.
We had Marcus Ross, and we did a couple of episodes as well to sort of top and tail that series.
That's right.
And we had loads and loads of questions about that issue. Where to begin? I think one of the questions that people wanted to know is, are we going to cover other positions on the flood post-flood boundary? Because people will remember that, you know, Tim was representing the position where you have a high flood boundary, high in the Cenozoic, so this is basically just below the Ice Age. So, you know, all of the fossil record up to the Ice Age is basically flood, and then you have the Ice Age immediately after the flood. And then Marcus's position was to put the boundary, the end of the flood, a bit lower in the geological record, so around the end of the Mesozoic, which is where the dinosaurs disappear. So you have the whole of, known as the Cenozoic, so culminating in the Ice Age. All of that would then be post-flood. So we have these two main positions. And they are the two sort of main positions, I think, that we see in creationism. But we are aware there are lots of other views. There are people who want to put the flood boundary lower than Marcus does, you know, maybe around the end of the Paleozoic, or maybe even down in the Precambrian.
Oh, yeah.
There are all kinds of different views. And I guess at some point we will come back to those. We kind of stuck to the two main ones in that series, but I'm not opposed to covering other possibilities.
You gotta keep it manageable, right? So
Yeah.
those seem to be the two that people are really arguing about. But you're right, there are other ideas that other people have suggested. And when you go into the history of the situation, and you look at, for example, 19th century scriptural geologists,
Yeah.
then you got an even wider array of ideas,
Yes.
which I think is really interesting. So
Yeah.
looking at this historically, yeah, there's a lot of
There was
disagreement.
even more diversity and disagreement than today. I mean, we think, you know, we've got lots of disagreement today about that question, but even more so in the past. So yeah, we'll come back to that. So that's the first thing I just wanted to address.
All right, good. That's one question. We did it. And it was pretty succinct.
Oh, good.
Yeah. All right. Question number one. Todd's questions. Question number one. Why is it so hard for some creationists to accept the baraminology studies that show certain hominins as human? Oh, man. Everything that you can possibly imagine is involved in this, right? So there's of course, legitimate scientific questions, I think. Questions about the quality of fossils. Questions about whether these fossils ought to have that name, right? Is there really such a thing? One of the things that I'm interested in right now, is there really such a thing as Homo habilis? Is that really a thing?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there diversity? More diversity beyond Homo erectus and Homo ergaster? In Eastern Africa. Yeah, those are legitimate questions. I think there's certainly a lot of crisis of faith with regards to who is the most trustworthy person to listen to in creationism, because you've got a lot of people who are not experts and they don't really know, and so they feel like, I've always liked this person over here and he says X, and Todd Wood is very suspicious because he says something different. I get it. I think there are good reasons why people have these reactions, and I share some of them, and I don't share others. And let's call that an answer.
Okay, very succinct. So I'm going to come back to the flood post-flood boundary because there were loads of questions about this. So now we kind of, I think in that closing episode in that series, we sort of laid our own cards on the table a bit, and we sort of said we if push came to shove, we would probably put the post-flood boundary around the end of the Mesozoic where Marcus was putting it, around, you know, where the dinosaurs disappear.
Sure.
And of course that then raises the question, how do we explain all the vast sedimentary deposits which are assigned to the Cenozoic that are post
Yes.
And I think that troubles a lot of people. You know, the volume, the quantity of Cenozoic sediments that we have to explain. So just a few quick thoughts about this. I mean, there's lots more that could be said. When we look at the earlier part of the record, the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, what do we see there? And I'm talking in broad brush strokes here. but we see marine deposits which are very widespread across the continents. That's what characterizes those deposits. When we get to the Cenozoic, we see something a little bit different. We see sediments which are more terrestrial in character, and they're not as widespread. Now, there may be a big volume of Cenozoic sediments, but take North America, for instance. A lot of those sediments are thick sediments which are offshore. So one of the things that's been talked about is this deposit in the Gulf of Mexico called the Whopper Sand. Okay, it's a thick deposit in the Gulf of Mexico, but it's offshore, right? Whereas in the Paleozoic and Mesozoic, we see marine deposits on the continents. So there's something different going on in the Cenozoic. We also have some sediments kind of piled up adjacent to the mountains, along the Rocky Mountains. In South America, adjacent to the Andes. Now, to my mind, and again, what's interesting is when you look at the geologic age of those deposits, the Whopper Sand, the Powder River Basin sediments, these are basically close to the end of the flood, if the end of the flood is around that end of the Mesozoic. So these are Paleocene, Eocene age deposits. So to me, that kind of looks like sediments which are associated with late flood and post-flood runoff, ending up offshore, sediments which are being deposited in a tectonically active region where the mountains are rising at the end of the flood and you're having material deposited in basins adjacent to those mountains. So to me, those thick Cenozoic sediments kind of fit with an end of the flood that's around the end of the Mesozoic. So that's kind of what I would say. What are the processes involved? Because this is the other question that then gets raised. Well, if the flood's over, how are you depositing these sediments? But I think you have to realise that a worldwide catastrophe like the flood doesn't kind of just switch off over, just like that.
Yeah.
There are going to be repercussions of that flood going on. Oh, you could say, in one sense, we're still in the recovery phase of the flood today.
Yes.
So this is ongoing. So that you're going to, immediately after the flood, you're going to have this very tectonically, volcanically unstable world where you have huge potential for erosion and then sedimentation from the products of that erosion. There was a paper at ICC back in, I think it's 2013, John Whitmore did a paper about the implications of, post-flood processes for mass wasting, mass erosion. So I think we do have sort of mechanisms for it that kind of make sense if these things are post-flood. How about that? That was a
good
quick race through.
That, yeah, because
a lot of complex
that's
questions.
a series of episodes, I think, because Cenozoic is so localized.
Yeah.
You kind of need a different explanation for every kind of deposit that there is. It's not like the Mesozoic where you have things that you can trace across a continent. Yeah. All right. Well, that was 3 questions. How about question 4? What are your thoughts on primates using tools? Is this good evidence that they are evolving? This is something that has been shaking me for a while. Oh, no. Please don't be shaken by that. Primates aren't the only ones that use tools. There are other tool users that are animals, so it's not really all that shocking to me. The kinds of tools they use are really simple. So chimpanzees, for example, will take a twig and strip off all the pieces of the twig, all the stuff that sticks out from the twig, and stick it into a termite nest and pull it out and then eat the termites. Pretty ingenious, I admit, but it's not an internal combustion engine.
Yeah.
Right? Some primates have learned to smash rocks together to make sharp edges. But again, that's not an iPhone. So yeah, my thoughts on this. These tools are all quite simplistic. And when there's a new paper out that was looking at this, and there is a pretty marked change in the character of tools in the archaeological record based on the number of times that you have struck a rock in order to shape the tool. There are certain tools where there's a very few number of strikes in order to create the tool, and then there are others where there are many strikes in order to shape the tool, and that there's actually a significant difference between the two classes. So on the one hand, you've got the easy tools that could be made by us or by an animal, and then you have the more sophisticated tools, which I think pretty clearly only for us. So do not be alarmed by that. There's nothing there that makes me the least bit bothered that there's chimpanzees that can make tools. I think cool, good for them. They're still living like chimps and flinging poop at each other. So.
And there are some birds that use corvids, exactly. Sort of ravens and the raven family, and they have some quite.
They're very
clever sort of puzzle solvers and things. Yeah, very good. So another question. This is an interesting one. What do we think about Graham Hancock's Younger-Dryas civilization theory, and can it fit into the creation model? Okay, so let me just give you a bit of background here. So this question relates to what's called the Younger-Dryas impact theory, which proposes that the onset of the Younger-Dryas. Now, the Younger-Dryas was kind of a cool period at the end of the last glacial period. So in conventional dating, this is about sort of 12,900 years ago. And the Younger-Dryas impact theory says that event, that cool period, was triggered by some kind of extraterrestrial event. So either a comet that struck North America or that maybe exploded in the air over North America.
Was it aliens?
Was it aliens? Well, no.
Okay, just checking. Sorry.
So, and proponents of this idea point to some evidence. They talk about sort of microscopic debris that's found in sediments that sort of coincide with this. There are some black, organic, rich soil layers which are meant to be interpreted as evidence of wildfires that might have been triggered by this impact event. And they say that it coincided with the extinction of the Ice Age megafauna, the disappearance of the Clovis culture, which people here may know about.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And Graham Hancock is he's not a scientist. I think he's a journalist. Yeah. But he's kind of one of these sort of fringe sort of figures. He's written a lot of these books which are quite sensational. And there was a book that he wrote and then a TV series which I saw some episodes from, Ancient Apocalypse.
Yes.
Where he claimed that the Younger-Dryas impact event kind of wiped out some sophisticated Ice Age civilization and was responsible for the flood legends, the flood stories that we find around the world. So this was kind of the Graham Hancock sort of idea, his kind of spin on it.
It doesn't sound very creationist.
No, it doesn't sound very. So what are we to make of it? Well, the first thing I think we should say is that the Younger-Dryas impact idea itself is very controversial. It's not widely accepted in the scientific community. So a lot of scientists think that the Younger-Dryas was basically caused by the slowdown or the shutdown of the North Atlantic conveyor, major ocean current system, caused by a sudden influx of fresh water into the ocean from deglaciation in North America. So they don't think it was related to an impact event at all. So it is a kind of, it's a very controversial idea. Even if it's correct, even if, they're correct about the impact, we're talking about something that happened at the end of the last glacial period. Now, in the creationist model, the Ice Age is something that happened after the flood, right? In fact, it happened as a consequence of the flood. So if this is an event that happened at that time, this has nothing to do with the flood or the origin of the flood stories. This would be a kind of post-flood event, maybe a post-flood catastrophe of some kind. So I don't think Graham Hancock's thinking of it as the origin of those flood stories and the flood legends. It's not. This is something that happened after the flood. So I think maybe we should give Graham Hancock some credit for being willing to think outside the box, for being willing to think about, for being willing to take the flood stories seriously, for one thing. I mean,
that's rare.
That's rare. So I think we should give him some credit for that. And, maybe he's onto something, but I think he's come up with kind of the wrong, he's put the pieces together in the wrong way.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah. The thing that bugs me about Graham Hancock is he seems to jump to that conclusion. Oh, right. It's the Younger-Dryas.
Right.
When there's just zero connective tissue.
Right.
Here's a layer of whatever, archaeological layer. Oh, Younger-Dryas. Yeah. I wish he had more self-critical attitude and more skepticism towards his own ideas.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's my reaction. I have not watched much of his show. I can't get through it.
Okay. Yeah, it's controversial.
Yeah.
And I think I'd want to be convinced more that the Younger-Dryas impact event really happened, that there was an impact, for one thing. And then, of course, even if you become convinced that it's not connected to the flood, it's after the flood.
Yeah. All right. Question 3. Now this one, we already posted an answer on YouTube, but I'm going to read this one anyway because it's an interesting one. Are human fossil bones actual bones, or are they fossilized like dinosaur bones? Yes. Some purportedly fossil bones are actually the original mineral material. Mm-hmm. You find that quite a bit with Neanderthals. And others are mineralized, especially material you might find in a cave. That tends to be mineralized. Mm-hmm. So it just depends. Depends on the circumstances, depends on where you find them and what they are. Are the human, and this is related to this question, are the human fossils post-flood, and therefore descendants of Noah, or could some represent those who perished in the flood or even before it? And of course, you can imagine how those two connect, because if you've got stuff that's mineralized and turned into rock, that you would think, oh, that must be flood. And then if it's still bone, you might think that's post-flood. It's not that easy, I don't think, because mostly I think there's a very good case to be made that hominin bones are post-flood. All of them. All of them. And there are many reasons for that. I covered some of them in my recent paper at ICC on human history from Adam to Abraham. So I recommend that. We'll put that in the show notes. You can read some of the reasons there for why I think hominin fossils are all post-flood.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah, very good.
Another quick answer.
Yeah. This is a really interesting question. I'd actually quite like to hear your thoughts on this as well.
Okay.
I think this is from someone who's probably not a creationist, but maybe I'm making an assumption there. What would convince us we're wrong? And I think the questioner must have had creationism in mind. What would convince us we're wrong about creation?
What's it going to take?
Yeah, what's it going to take?
Give me a list, and I'll go get it.
Yeah, I'll go get it. So, I mean, this is a very interesting question, actually. What would persuade us
it is.
that we're wrong?
Yeah.
And I've thought about this a bit. Scientifically speaking, what would convince me I'm wrong? I'm not sure. Now, you in the past, I've heard you talk about kind of higher order and lower order concepts.
Yeah.
And how, evidence against lower order concepts doesn't necessarily cause you to question the higher order concepts.
Right.
That they can be quite impervious to evidence.
They can.
Now, let's explain this. So, a higher order concept might be belief in creation.
Yeah.
Or belief in evolution.
Yeah.
A lower order concept might be the theories that connect that belief in creation to actual data.
Yep.
So, we might have all kinds of creationist theories. And some of them might turn out to be wrong. Like the vapor canopy theory.
Whoops.
Or the Paluxy River tracks.
Whoops.
We've talked about these things in our podcast.
Yep.
But does that mean that we question the higher level concept? No, because we can just think of other theories that kind of better fit with our belief in creation and that fit the data. Evolution's the same. So let's say, I mean, a wild idea. Let's say somebody came up with some evidence tomorrow that disproved natural selection altogether. I mean, that's
Sure. Get me a Lamborghini while you're dreaming, right?
Let's just say natural selection was ruled out. Is that going to cause people to question the higher level concept of evolution? No, because there are all kinds of other possible mechanisms that you might come up with for how evolution operates. So it's actually quite hard to think of things that would cause you to question the higher level concept. Have I kind of
Yeah, you're right.
represented
That's
your views
correct, yeah.
fairly on that? So, I mean, even the famous, what about a Precambrian rabbit?
Yeah.
I'm not convinced that would be enough.
No, I don't think so.
To disprove evolution, because you could come up with all kinds of scenarios, I think, that would accommodate that. It would require a very radical rewriting of evolution.
Correct.
But it could be done, I think.
I think so, yeah, I think so.
So scientifically, I don't know what would make me change my mind, because my commitment to creation is to do with how I view Scripture and my relationship with God and things like that, which are not really connected to sort of how I interpret details of the data.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? I think it would have to be something theological or something biblical. You know, if somebody could persuade me that my reading of Scripture was entirely misguided, well, now you'd maybe be onto something. I don't think that's likely to happen, because I think over the years I've become more confident that certainly I've changed my mind about lots of things, biblically and theologically, but in broad outline, I think I'm understanding the Bible correctly. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't take the view I did if I didn't think that. But I think that would be the only thing that would really, really change my mind, is some kind of compelling argument that I'd misread what Scripture is saying about this.
Yeah. Yeah, and this question comes up in my interaction with Daryl Falk, because there you're not dealing with some atheist who's trying to talk you out of your faith. You're dealing with a fellow Christian who just wants you to see creation differently.
Right.
And the answer that I give there, and I've given ever since, is sort of related to what you said. The Bible tells us that whatever is not of faith is sin. So what I need to do to change my mind is to see how my faith would lead me to this new understanding. And that would have to do with my understanding of the Bible.
Yeah.
It would have to do with my understanding of my theology. And it would have to be a personal experience, I think, an encounter with God. God would have to come and tell me, no, I'm sorry, you were wrong. And I know that seems impossible, but I don't think that's impossible at all.
No.
Because God's changed my mind about a lot of things.
Yeah. I've changed my mind about lots of things.
Lots of things that I grew up thinking this is absolutely true, and now I'm thinking, okay, I'm sorry about that. But yeah, the scientific details, I feel like even if I changed, thinking about hominins, one of the projects I'm working on right now is studying the fossils, specifically the fossils of Homo habilis. So that's a name that gets thrown around as a hominin species. And what I want to know is this weird collection of fossils that people say is Homo habilis, is that really, are they really a species? Is that really a name we should use? And that skepticism, that's going to still be there no matter what I think about human evolution.
Yeah.
Because there are human evolutionists who think, I don't think Homo habilis is a very good thing. And so, yeah, for me, I need that faith. I don't want to make a snap judgment, and I don't ever want anybody else to make a snap judgment either. I don't want you to come listen to me talk on human origins and just flip-flop to some new position. No, don't do that. Think carefully about what you actually believe. And if it's a case of you didn't really have a belief before and you do now, I guess that's different. But if you're so easily persuaded by some guy showing up and telling you you should think this because of these reasons, that's not a healthy place to be.
Yeah.
I don't want you to be like that. So be more critical.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah.
Well, that was my question, really, but we both had something to say about that, so it's your turn.
Let me go to the next one here. Number 4. Could the Cenozoic horses have diversified so rapidly? And what are the chances that all the different types would be fossilized in local post-flood catastrophes? So this goes back to a paper that I contributed to decades ago, where I claimed that the fossil equids, here referred to as Cenozoic horses, are all members of the same created kind. And that the fossil equid series that has been used as evidence for evolution is actually evidence for the diversification of horses after the flood. Now, this question basically says, is that possible? And the answer is no idea. Could they have diversified so rapidly? If God wanted it to happen and God built special mechanisms into the system to make it happen, then of course. If you're expecting sort of neo-Darwinian mechanisms, random mutation and evolution and variation and natural selection to account for it, then no. I don't think that's a fast enough mechanism, but I don't think that's the mechanism. So that doesn't really, I don't know how to judge the could it happen question. Yes, I guess it could. God can make anything happen. What are the chances that all the different types would be fossilized in a local post-flood catastrophes? Well, I'd say the chances of all the types being preserved is pretty low. But I don't think all the types have been preserved. So there's a lot. We're probably just scratching the surface of horse diversity. So that's my answer.
Yeah.
I accept skepticism. I would like to see better studies done of fossil horses because I think that's a really interesting sort of textbook example of evolution that gets tossed around a lot, and I would like to have a really good creationist response. And I think our current response has a lot of open questions, more than I like. So I would like to see more work done. That's good enough.
Hold that thought.
Okay. Oh no.
There may be some work going on fossil horses.
You heard it here first, folks.
Okay, so here's an interesting one. I confess I hadn't heard about this, so I had to look this up. So
okay.
The question was, what do we think about the seemingly ancient wagon wheel found in a coal mine in Donetsk, Ukraine in 2008? So, so it's kind of a question I think about these sort of out of place artifacts that you kind of read about, and come up in the literature, every now and then. So I hadn't heard of this particular one. I've heard of them, a lot of them. So I did a bit of Googling, and it's basically, there isn't very much online, but it looks as if this thing, whatever it is, was found in the roof of a coal mine in 2008, as they say, in the Ukraine. There were workers in the mine. They were at a depth of almost 3,000 feet below the surface.
Okay.
And they found what appeared to be the imprint of a wheel in the sandstone in the roof of the coal mine.
You mean, so when you say wheel, you're not talking about like a track. You're talking about a round thing.
Wheel. Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah,
wheel.
Spokes. So
spokes. Okay.
Yeah, so there it is in the roof of the coal mine. So to put it in context, these are Carboniferous coal deposits.
Ooh.
So conventionally dated to, maybe 300 million years old, something like that. In the creation model, these would be flood rocks. Yep. These would be deposits associated with the pre-flood floating forest, that Kurt Wise has talked about. So anyway, I kind of Googled this, and I found that there were some photos of this thing online where you could actually see this thing in situ in the roof of this coal mine. I had a look at them, at these few sort of grainy photos.
Yeah.
What you see in the photos is basically a roughly sort of circular structure.
Mm-hmm.
that has what appears to be some kind of central mass.
Okay.
With some kind of a couple of radiating sort of spoke-like things coming out of the central mass to the circular outline of the wheel.
Okay.
So I looked at this, and I to me, it didn't look regular enough to be a wheel. It kind of looked a bit organic. So the mass in the centre didn't really look like the hub of a wheel, and the spokes didn't quite look regular enough to be the spokes in a manufactured wheel. So I started to think, what could this be? And I just wonder, and I'm speculating because obviously I haven't seen this thing, I don't have any really good clear photographs, there's no other information online, I just have these grainy photos to go on. But I began to wonder if what we're looking at is a cross-section of a trunk of a tree of some kind, which would kind of make sense to the geological context because you're in a coal mine, right?
Yep.
So
that's a forest.
Coal is plant material, fossilized plant material. We know that we find trunks of trees, upright trees often, in these coal measure deposits. And I just wondered if in the roof of this mine you're looking at a cross-section of a trunk, this roughly circular structure. Now, I don't know enough about the anatomy of the kinds of plants that we find in the coal to know what kind of tree that might be.
Right.
It's just my speculation. But my initial reaction, that's for what it's worth, is that I think this is a fossil of some kind. This is a fossil tree.
The blurry pictures would be equally dubious evidence that this is a wheel.
Yes.
I mean, you cannot say there's a Carboniferous wheel from Ukraine in a coal mine,
right,
any more than you could say there's a Carboniferous stump.
Yeah.
Because it's just not enough.
Yeah, we don't
It's
know.
just not enough.
There's not enough to go on. I haven't found any more information about it than...
But a stump certainly fits it fits a lot easier.
Yeah,
Than
it kind of
somebody
ticks some
riding around in
boxes.
wagons
Right.
in the
Yeah.
Carboniferous.
Yeah, in the floating forest.
Yeah,
From a creationist perspective. It doesn't make sense.
That's a great place to be riding your wagon. Yeah, I generally find those out of place artifacts, they're either wishful thinking, because I see this natural thing and I think it must be this, it must be a wagon wheel.
Right.
There's a better explanation. Or they are simply not secure.
Yeah.
Here's a hammer, but I don't know where you got that hammer from. And I don't know, there's no context to this anymore, so I don't know what this is. Or they're frauds.
Yeah.
I carved a skull out of a piece of coal.
Yeah.
That's not, I'm sorry, that's not real. Anyway, question number 5. Was the corruption of the earth sudden or gradual? Did sin entering the world suddenly create dangerous biological structures? Was it slow and gradual, like the decline in human lifespans? I don't know. My suspicion is, given the fact that the modern world runs on death, all of the nutrient cyclings, all of the element cyclings, all of that depend on bodies that die and decompose. My suspicion is that the fall event, in order to bring death into the world, had to be something quite dramatic, and was not just a matter of T-Rex deciding one day, I think I should have Triceratops with my salad today. No, that's not it. I think it's a bit more sudden. Now, how much the rest, how did that play out in detail? Could there still be emerging things that come from the fall? Absolutely. There are emerging things. COVID was one of them. HIV was another. And there will continue to be these health crises because we live in a fallen world that's out to kill us, in a sense. But I think the initial shift from people don't die and some animals don't die to now everything dies, that's a major shift. That is not a minor change in diet or behavior. That's a completely new ecology.
A question about granites. Now, we've talked about granites, I think, in at least one episode, maybe more than one. The question was this: could granites simply be creation week basement rocks? Granites have never been produced in the laboratory. In the laboratory, if you take a granite magma and you cool it, it forms a fine-grained rhyolite and not a coarse-grained granite.
Oh.
So, interesting question. And this has been something that has been discussed in the creation literature going back to at least, I think, the 1970s.
At least.
Now, I think the evidence is conclusive that these granite bodies were not creation week basement rocks. Well, let me row back. There could be some creation week basement rocks,
sure.
That are granitic. But many of the ones that people are talking about are not creation week rocks. We can't say all granites are creation week basement rocks, because some of those granites intrude into fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks that date from the flood.
What do you mean by intrude into?
Intrude into. So, if you go way back to our episodes about the geological column, we talked about principles as to how we interpret and establish sequences of events.
Okay.
And one of those principles was something called the principle of cross-cutting relationships.
Oh.
So, if you take, if you've got a sedimentary rock, and then you have a fracture through the sedimentary rock that is then filled in with something else.
Okay.
We know that the sedimentary rock had to be there first.
With the layers.
With the layers. Mm-hmm. And then the fracture that cuts through the sedimentary rock and then is infilled with something else had to come later.
Got it.
So, the principle of cross-cutting relationships, granites often cut through and intrude into sedimentary rock layers. So we know that the sedimentary rock layers were there first, and then the granites came later. So we can establish that order of events. Now, if those sedimentary rocks are fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks from the flood, we know that the granite had to be intruded at some point during the flood, or even perhaps after the flood. Right? It has to come after the sedimentary rocks. Now, we also have other evidence, because we have the relationship between the granites and the sedimentary rocks. For example, we see that the granites, the heat from the magma, has sometimes baked the surrounding sedimentary rocks. It's kind of cooked them.
Wow.
So there's a baked margin around the granite where the sedimentary rocks have been altered because of the heat coming from the granite body. So again, we know that the sedimentary rocks were there when the granite was in place, and that the granite was in place as a hot magma.
Wow.
Right? It wasn't intruded cold as some kind of cold block of rock. It was intruded as a magma. The granites themselves sometimes have fine-grained margins where they have been chilled by the surrounding sedimentary rocks. So as you get to the margin of the granite, you actually find that it has a finer grain size because the crystals have cooled, it's cooled more quickly, and the crystals are formed nucleated sort of quickly, and so you get this sort of fine-grained texture where the cooling was more rapid along the margins of the granite. So we know that these were intruded and that they post-date the sedimentary rocks. Now, it is true that granites have not been produced in the laboratory, and a lot of people kind of use this as the killer argument. But why haven't we been able to produce a granitic rock in the laboratory by cooling a granitic magma?
We can't generate that much heat and pressure?
Yeah, I think it's to do with the level of the sophistication of our experimental procedures. It's not to do with the fact that it can't happen. We have been able to produce minerals that we find in granites in crystal forms and sizes that are typical of granites. We've been able to produce some minerals that have textures that are typical of granites. We haven't actually produced a kind of hand-sized lump of granite in the laboratory, but that's just the limitations of what we're able to do in the laboratory, I think. So I don't think there's any real reason to think that all granites have to be Creation Week basement rocks.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that was good. All right. We got time. Let's continue here. Number 6, what about designs that can't plausibly be explained other than as a response to deadly threat or an intention to kill? For instance, the mimicry of certain insects, the nematocysts of dinoflagellates, or the strategy to produce lots of offspring so some of them have a chance to survive. Yep, what about
Great question.
That's all part of natural evil as well, I think. Now the mimicry, I could imagine the mimicry is not necessarily, the mimicry could just be design. But those are, producing a ridiculous number of offspring, yeah, that's an adaptation to getting certain small fraction through and getting enough of those individuals. So that's definitely all those issues are going to relate to the fall. But again, I think there's certain forms of mimicry, stick insects, for example, that could just be because God thought it would be cool. Or God decided in his design he wanted some animals that looked like other things. And I think that's brilliant. So we also have stone flowers as well as stone crops that look like little rocks, living rocks, but are not rocks, they're plants. So there are other forms of that kind of mimicry. So that could be design, that could be artistic expression kind of thing. I don't think it has to be survival. But otherwise, most of those things that you bring up in that question, those are all related to the fall in some fashion.
Yeah. We had several questions that relate to what we might call the gap theory. There's still, people have questions about this. So one of the questions we received was, on which of the 6 days did God create or prepare a place for the devil and his angels? When did Lucifer fall? And on what day was there a rebellion and an ensuing conflict in the heaven? Whether you like it or not, you must place a gap somewhere within the 6 days of creation for these events to occur. So that was kind of the question, the comment.
Why?
Well, that was my initial reaction. My initial reaction was I don't really accept the premise of the question.
Yeah.
Why it has to be during the creation week. Lucifer and his angels, they're created beings, right? They were part of the creation. Mm-hmm. Now, they're not explicitly mentioned in Genesis chapter 1.
Nope.
We're not told exactly when they were created. But my working assumption, because they are part of the creation, is that they were created at some point during that week, probably close to the beginning, because we do have the reference, I suppose, in Job 38, I think it is, about the morning stars singing for glory as they see God sort of creating. So I think probably they were among the first of his creations. Mm-hmm. But that's an inference. We don't actually have that recorded for us in Genesis 1. But given that we do have, at the end of the creation week, the statement that God surveyed all that he'd made and it was very good, I assume that means that the angelic creation was very good as well. And
that's how I would read it, yeah. Everything that he had made, behold, it was very good. Yeah.
So I think the fall of Lucifer, that rebellion, Lucifer being cast out of heaven, must have happened after the completion of creation, after God rests from the work of creation.
Yes.
And before Eve then encounters the serpent in the garden. So at some point, that may give a fairly narrow sort of window of time for when it happens, but I think that's when it happens. That's the inference that I draw from what we do have recorded for us in Scripture. I don't think you have to put it in the 6 days of creation somewhere. I don't think there has to be a gap.
So yeah, I agree with you. The question is loaded, and I don't know why you'd have to put it in there. All you have to do is, if you're going to accept the canonical testimony of Scripture that the serpent is related somehow to Satan, and is an evil tempter, then all you need to do is Satan needs to do that before that happens.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
But that's who knows how long that is. I don't know how long that is.
Yeah.
Well, actually, It has to be before Seth was born.
Yes, it has to be before Eve was
Yes.
Eve conceived.
Eve was 130 years old by that point.
Yeah.
So, but that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time. Anyway. All right, let's see what else we have here. Number 7. We don't know what a scorpion was like before the fall. I don't know that that's true, but okay. Maybe we don't know. Maybe we do. I don't know. We do know what the maker was like before the fall. Oh, do we? I guess he never changes, so I guess if we know him now, yeah, I guess we know what he's like before the fall. Although I'm not sure that I would be able to describe the maker and his motives. But anyway. Could our arch enemy, the devil, have been involved in evil, elegant designs? Oh man. Yes, of course. I think it's at least a possibility. However, I have no scriptural basis to think that that's what happened, that he was involved in any of this, that he was involved in manipulating the physical reality of creation. I don't have, there's just nothing. And so, in my mind, that's kind of getting into the realm of ad hoc explanations and special pleading. So my inclination and my preference is to avoid that explanation. Not because it's weird, because it is weird, but because I just don't know how to constrain it, right? If you're going to bring God into your hypothesizing, you got to have something specific you can say, not just, God could have made it that way, because that's not going to help you understand anything. Yeah. And if your explanation for natural evil is, well, the devil could have made it that way, sure, but I don't think the devil made scorpions. I don't think it's true, and I don't think it's a very useful theory about the origin of scorpions.
Yeah.
Anyway.
This is a question about biogeography. And the question is this: how did Cenozoic mammals get to North America after the flood, but before the Ice Age? I think the premise being that, during the Ice Age, if you have water from the oceans locked up in the ice sheets, you lower sea level, so more land is exposed. So you have, for example, the land bridge.
You have land bridges. Bering.
Like the Bering, Beringia, that then allows animals to get into North America.
By walking.
By walking. But how did that happen? Because we have fossil mammals in North America in the Paleocene and the Eocene, and much earlier, before there were the Ice Age land bridges.
Yeah.
So how did they get there? There's a very important contribution on this topic, which was published back in 2003, I think, at the ICC by Kurt Wise and Matthew Croxton, which is about rafting as a potentially important biogeographic distribution mechanism in the early post-flood period. We ought to get Matt on to do an episode about this. But the idea is they propose that, during the flood, you imagine you've ripped up all of the world's forests. And some of them will have been deposited, as coal and this kind of thing. But there'd probably be an awful lot of debris floating around in the oceans. You would have these massive debris mats and log jams, that are sort of drifting with the ocean currents. And these would be a potential food source for herbivores. Mm-hmm. Herbivores would be attracted to these mats because there was food. Carnivores might then follow the herbivores. And because these mats are big, they could potentially, carry quite sizable animals. And as they drift with the ocean currents, they could transport animals across ocean barriers. Mm-hmm. I mean, we do actually have examples of this happening in the modern world on a much smaller scale. But after the flood, it was probably a very important mechanism because there was so much debris floating around in the oceans. In that particular paper, they showed that it was actually able to explain a lot of distributions of animals and plants, which was really interesting. And then over time, of course, what would happen is as those mats became sort of waterlogged, they would degrade over time. Plants would kind of fall out of the mats, or the mats would break up.
Sure.
They'd degrade, so that the importance of that mechanism would decline, over time. But in the early post-flood period, it could have been quite a significant way for animals to get to other parts of the world. And of course, they even would have had a fresh water source on those mats, because rainfall onto these mats would have
Sure. It gives you puddles.
It gives you puddles, so you'd have had a source of water as well.
Yeah.
So I think that there may be other things going on too, but I think that would be one important part of the answer.
Yeah, that would be my main response to that question. How do you get there before glacial maximum and the exposure of the land bridges? Because you still have, even at glacial maximum with exposure of land bridges, you still have places that are inhabited, yet were not attached to the Ararat region by a land bridge. Yeah. So land bridges can't explain everything all on their own. Yeah. Even though it explains quite a lot. I would love to hear more of your thoughts on entropy and its role. I was fascinated by your comments on its role in keeping us alive. And that comment you made in passing that I think Adam and Eve must have had a body radically different before the fall. Please explain. No. That's a whole episode. I can sort of reiterate what I said, and that is that nearly every important biochemical, well, not important, every central biochemical reaction that's common across everything is entropically driven. So the formation of a membrane, for example, the formation of various bonds that hold proteins and DNA together, those are entropically driven. And that can be demonstrated using thermodynamic principles and biochemical experimentation. So we can see that, our ability to exist in this body, in this universe, is dependent on entropy. And so the concept that the fall is the source of entropy really doesn't follow. It doesn't make sense, because entropy is more than just, I have a messy room because I don't clean it up. Entropy is basically what's keeping us alive. And that's biochemistry. But that sounds like I need probably do a whole lecture on it with PowerPoint slides and documented experimentation and so forth. Yeah. Because that's a complicated question. But thanks for asking. Unfortunately, you showed up in the jumbo Q&A, so let's move on.
Well, I've got a question that I'm going to conclude with, but just one comment. And this, again, was something that came in from several people. Okay. People wanted us to include more charts and visuals in some of our episodes because, when we were talking about, geological time periods or, geological column, or when we're talking about some of the biblical chronology stuff, people really wanted sort of more visuals and charts and things to help. It would certainly help at times, and we have talked about this. We recognise that. I think post-production times are often quite constrained to do as much as we'd like. I'm also always cognizant of the fact that lots of people listen to us as an audio podcast, and they don't actually have. They don't watch us on YouTube, right? And so if we rely too much on kind of charts and visuals, some of those people might be a bit left behind. But we certainly are always thinking of ways that we can kind of improve what we do and sort of add value to it. So that is a helpful comment to hear.
You're talking about a lot of added expense because of the amount of time that it takes to create the visuals as well. Yeah. So you're ballooning our budget, our per episode budget, quite a bit if we have to go and add a lot of audio visual bonus stuff. Yeah. That's more difficult.
Yeah. But anyway, let me come on to the question that I'm going to end with, and it's that you may have something to say about this too. And I think it again comes out of our biblical chronology series. So, is there a hidden prophetic message in the names listed in Genesis chapter 5? So you know what I'm going to talk about here. So the idea is that the list of names that we've got in Genesis 5 that goes from Adam to Noah can be read as a kind of description or some kind of prophecy of the gospel story, the biblical story. So there are various versions of this, I think. But the one mentioned here is where you look at the meaning of the names and they kind of seem to spell out a message. So Adam means man, Seth means appointed, Enosh means mortal, Kenan means sorrow. So the message that we have is, and I'll read it, man is appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching that his death shall bring the despairing rest. And this is seen as a kind of prophecy of the gospel, the coming Messiah. So this was the question. Do we think that this is legitimate? Now, I don't know what your views are about this. I think there are some problems with this idea. One is that we're talking about a list of proper names here. Now, I know names have meanings. We were talking about this at lunchtime, about the meaning of names.
We were, yeah.
But is there any reason in the context here, in this passage, that we should read these as anything other than just people's names? And I don't see anything that is kind of leading us to do that in this particular context. So that's the first thing. It just seems to be a genealogy with the names of these people. The second thing is that you can't always derive the meaning of something from its root. And very often this kind of scenario is based on what is the root meaning from which this name is derived. And that isn't always legitimate. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. And also, scholars often disagree about what these names mean. There are some names where it's not clear at all what the name actually means. It's very obscure. And in some cases, scholars come up with different possible meanings. Why would God encrypt that message in this passage? The gospel message is clear in the Bible. Why would it need to be encrypted in some kind of hidden code here, when elsewhere God just reveals the gospel message to us quite plainly? So I think there are lots of questions that I have in my mind about this, although it is a very popular idea. I see this come up a lot. I don't know if you have any other thoughts about it.
I am not an expert in language.
No, me neither.
Definitely not an expert in Hebrew. So I have no ability to judge the fundamental point that this is what those names mean. Mm-hmm. I don't think I share your other skepticisms. Is it possible that God could have done this? Yeah. Is it possible? Is it possible that why would God do this? Because God is a teller of the future. He tells us what's coming. And I think it's very intriguing. I think the idea that this could be a hidden prophecy that we never saw before is quite interesting.
Oh.
On the other hand, I have no ability to judge yes or no.
Well, there you go.
There you go. I don't know. I think it's cool. It's cool. It's not Bible code. I'll give you that.
Yes.
It's not trying to transform,
No.
make a cipher out of the Old Testament text and make numerological significance out of the numbers or some silliness like that. This is not that.
Yeah.
This is something quite different.
Yeah.
Is it possible? Maybe. I don't know. Okay. I don't know. I can't judge. I don't know.
No, we're not experts. And okay, well, maybe
maybe I should dig up some experts who might know something about that.
If you can dig up some experts, maybe I'm willing to be persuaded. I'm quite skeptical, but
it's perfectly reasonable.
But we'll see.
Maybe we could have a episode in our. I mean, this is about the genealogy, right? So it would fit into our biblical chronology episode. Well, we started out trying to do a jumbo episode.
Yeah.
With many pages of questions. I've gotten through almost one page.
Yeah, I've still got loads of questions.
Let me finish the page here so we can at least say that we got through the page. Are viruses really non-living? Yes, really. They are. And I know you go on to give me other reasons for why I should think that viruses, they are special and they are weird and they are not like normal, inert, non-living things. I'll absolutely grant you that. But a living thing left to itself does things. And viruses left to themselves, they are just as dead as a lump of metal or a bowl of pure water. They don't do anything. So they're dead. They're not living. I don't really want to get any farther into the philosophy of that because I don't think they're alive. That's my judgment. Now you know.
There you go.
All right.
I feel like we should shuffle our papers now and say, now it's time for the weather.
And that's the news. Well, thank you for watching. This has been fun.
Yeah.
I think we've covered quite a lot of interesting questions. And please feel free. You can email us, podcast@coresci.org. You can go to letstalkcreation.org. Find other ways to contact us. You can always leave us a comment on social media or leave a comment right down below if you're watching us on YouTube. And that is a great way for us to know what you're thinking and what your questions are. And maybe they'll end up in a future episode. Who knows?
Who knows?
We'll go.
Yeah.
So that's all for today.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, that was fun. Yeah. We'll do it again sometime.
Yeah.
Probably.
We have no shortage of questions.
We don't. So we didn't even get through all these.
Keep coming in. We love to read your questions. So we will see you guys, I guess, in a couple of weeks.
Yep. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Creation. For more information, visit us at letstalkcreation.org, where you'll find an archive of past episodes and all our show notes. If you'd like to leave a comment or make a suggestion, you can find us on all the major social media platforms. Let's Talk Creation is brought to you in the U.S. by Core Academy of Science and in the U.K. by Biblical Creation Trust. As a listener-supported ministry, we are grateful for all of your financial support. Find out how you can make a contribution at our website, letstalkcreation.org. Also remember to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Thanks, and see you next time.